personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a special guest on the show, Cameron Kerry. He's the former General Counsel and Secretary of the U.S. Department of Commerce in the Obama administration. He's a Andrew H. Tisch Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Brookings Institution, Center for Technology and Innovation, and the MIT Media Labs. He's a speaker, writer, thought leader on privacy, security, and technology policy. Welcome.
Thank you, Debbie. It's great to be joining you today.
Yeah. Well, we had the pleasure of meeting. Actually, I followed your career for many years, so it was a pleasure for me to meet you. You and I spoke on a panel at the Berkeley Forum recently, and we hit it off, and we thought it'd be great for you to be able to be on the show, and especially because there are a lot of things in the oven before midterm elections in the U.S. We have a lot to talk about, so thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you, Debbie. I'm flattered by your interest, but there is a lot going on. I think it's a reflection of really how mainstream privacy has become to issues, government, public policy over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I think you're in a unique position. In fact, I don't know anyone else in the U.S. that has really had the type of past that you've had. So you have, deep roots in public office, government and private practice, academia, thought leadership and think tanks and stuff like that. So I think you have just a unique perspective that a lot of people don't have about privacy. And I don't know, I feel like for many years, there were just not a lot happening on privacy. Now there's just so much excitement and so many things happening. So tell me a little bit about why privacy is such an important issue to you in your trajectory, your career, how you got here.
Well, thanks, Debbie. I've thought about that question as I write and as I engage in sort of public advocacy and outreach on this. I certainly think about, all right, why is privacy important? Why should we care? Why do we care about this issue? And I think it comes from my mind from a lot of things. I mean, I grew up as a child of the 60s and 70s when we had the surveillance of Dr. Martin Luther King. We had the surveillance of the anti-war movement, that something that I was engaged in, and my brother John Kerry was a national leader in that and was the subject of surveillance. I remember being in one of the important anti-war events in Washington with hundreds of thousands of people there, where he spoke, and being in a park with him afterwards. And, he went off for a walk with his wife, and seeing what were just a bunch of obvious undercover policemen or agents going off after them. So I'm certainly grew up conscious of the risks of government surveillance. So in law school, it's a subject that I was interested in, and my practice in law was always involved in communications, cable TV, broadcast, telecommunications, which is technology driven, that is, was conscious of the opportunities to collect data, and those are areas that have early privacy law. When I joined the Obama administration in 2009, I went with a sense that we needed to address privacy and security as part of sustaining the digital economy. I was aware of how much data is out there, how much that was increasing with digital technology, and then the advent of mobile phones. I think none of us quite grasped then, and I think even today don't grasp fully how much that data has exploded. But we set out to build trust in the digital economy. That is very much unfinished business today. I hope to see that happen.
And to your point about some obvious agents, following your brother John Kerry, now you don't need humans following you. You have digital devices that track you everywhere, right?
Well, absolutely. In a lot of our laws based on 18th century concepts, and so the courts talk about what the constable can do. Funny, these Supreme Court opinions. Who knows what a constable is today? But that's the language that the opinions use. Well, the constable could not engage in 24/7 surveillance, and so we see the Supreme Court saying, putting a location tracker on a car goes beyond the kind of surveillance that you could do tailing somebody. So that takes a warrant. The same thing with getting location data. So we are adapting, but we have a lot more to do.
I agree with that. I want your thoughts. So there's a lot brewing, or has been brewing over the years, with the Cloud Act, and we recently saw two things are happening. One is the U.S. and the U.K., their data access agreement just went into force. And then we are right on the cusp of having the new transatlantic data privacy framework between the EU and the US be passed. What are your thoughts about that whole brew of what's happening around data transfer internationally between the US and the UK and the EU?
Well, Debbie, it's a big question that covers a lot of ground. But in general, in this day and age where we are linked by an internet that operates at light speed and transfers data around the world, the ability to do that is essential to the value of that communications network, and it's not just a value for the providers. It provides value, network connections to all of us. It's part of what brings the world together in many different ways, economically, socially, politically, and also in adverse ways. I mean, we see that in the speed with which disinformation moves. But we need to preserve the benefits of that connectivity and deal with some of the risks. Well, one of the important benefits is our dealings with the European Union. That is the biggest trading relationship in the world, and accounts for almost half of the global economy. Both sides really depend on those data flows and communications, but the Europeans have their privacy laws that provide strong protections, and they want to make sure that the protections are comparable, or what they call essentially equivalent, on the American side. So, and the European Court of Justice has twice now struck down arrangements to enable that, mostly because of the surveillance that was revealed by Edward Snowden. And there is a perception, I think, that surveillance is more all-pervasive than, as much as the U.S. government can do. It's not as all-knowing as the perception goes. The U.S. has placed some strong limits around how we collect foreign intelligence, as well as the due process protections that we have under our Constitution for against the government collecting information. Those don't extend under our Constitution to people outside the United States. But President Obama in 2014 issued an executive order that extends protections to people outside the United States comparable to those that we as American citizens have, and puts in place some procedures to guarantee that, and make sure that there's oversight, make sure that people can bring complaints. But the court said that didn't go, wasn't independent enough, didn't ensure some judicial redress. So the new executive order, I expect, will set up, will go further in terms of the protections for people outside the U.S., and will set up a body with judicial powers that is independent, that can protect the privacy rights of people outside the U.S. As we protect those inside the U.S. So I'm hopeful that will stand up to what I'm sure will be another round of litigation in the EU. I think the issues of government access that you raised with the Cloud Act are related, but a different issue. But it all comes from all of that digital connectivity, and increasingly governments that are looking for evidence in criminal cases need to go someplace else, including outside national borders, to get that evidence. That evidence needs to be governed by rules, due process, like we have if you are getting that in the United States. And the Cloud Act sets up a mechanism for people to go and get evidence outside the United States, but provides for reciprocal protections with other countries. So the US-UK agreement essentially says, okay, the US can have a process to get evidence that has judicial review and standards has probable cause standards like we have it in the U.S. And that the UK can do the same with the same kinds of procedural guarantees. And I think, this is a way of sort of leveling up the standards, across the U.S. and like-minded countries.
Obviously there's been a lot of talk about this over the years, a lot of concern there. I think there are two streams of thought here. So one is companies, they just want to do business and transact stuff, and they don't really want to be involved in, anything having to do with surveillance or, have the government bust in or whatever. So that's part of the frustration. But then also, needing to have some type of mechanism that deals with, law enforcement situations where data may be needed. So I think these agreements, in my view, not only clarify how those processes should work, but then hopefully will give people who are doing commerce, have them feel a bit more comfortable with those data transfers.
No, I think that's right. I think when it comes to the dealing with the government, I think businesses just want to know what the rules are, and to try to comply with those rules. So I think having a common set of rules, with the United States, with Europe, with the United Kingdom, and other democratic countries will help that.
Let's talk a little bit about the ADPPA, so the American Data Privacy Protection Act, which was introduced in June of 2022. So I know this is a topic you like to talk about. I've read a lot of your work on this topic. I think we have a slight difference of opinion. I guess we can talk about that. It'd be a fun debate, I guess. So tell me a little bit about the ADPPA and why it is, well, we know we need legislation federally, right? But there's a fight and a squabble happening right now, and I think especially for our not only our national but our international audience, they like to know, why can't we get this thing done? So, what's your thoughts here?
Well, it's unfinished business for me, Debbie. I mean, I led the Obama administration's work on privacy policy and proposal called the Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights, which included having national legislation. It went out, under Barack Obama's signature. Is the first time that a president of the United States has called for national comprehensive privacy legislation. 10 years later, we still don't have that, because I think it wasn't enough of a political priority for people on Capitol Hill, and certainly not enough to overcome some of the opposition that was out there among businesses that didn't want people messing with their business models. But 10 years later, after Edward Snowden and the demonstration of just how much data is available out there, a succession of data breaches, Sony Equifax, a succession of data breaches, including high-profile ones like Sony and Equifax, and then, of course, the Cambridge Analytica revelations, which really brought it home because so many people are on Facebook, and this wasn't just the government; this was the commercial sector. So, all of those things, I think, just injected steroids into this debate, and we've had, I think, over the last 4 years, a pretty serious debate. And you can be cynical sometimes about Congress, but they've actually done some serious work on this. I mean, people were laughing back when they called Mark Zuckerberg in, and some of the questions that members of Congress were asking. They've learned a lot since then and gotten pretty sophisticated about privacy issues, and that's reflected in the ADPPA. The most important thing that it does is to put some boundaries around the collection and use and sharing of data. And that is the thing that has been lacking to this point and has been lacking in most other privacy legislation, both proposals in Congress and the state bills that are out there. For years, we've operated on the system of notice and consent. We all deal with this, right? You get those check boxes or things that inform you about cookies and just say, I consent. But those don't really do anything to control the information that companies can collect. Just because somebody has a privacy policy doesn't mean they're actually protecting your privacy. And right now, under that system, they get to set the rules. The privacy policy, it defines what they're going to collect, how they're going to use it, who they're going to share it with. Companies write those policies, and nobody reads them. They are very broad. I spend a lot of time with people who are privacy geeks like me, and who will say, look, I don't read those policies. I don't understand them when I read them. They're meaningless to me. So how the hell is this average non-technical person supposed to deal with that? So what we need is a system where people can trust that their information is going to be used in ways that is consistent with their privacy interests, with their other interests, with their expectations, with their dealings with the company, and not just being distributed out there in the wild. So having a law that puts some boundaries that says you can use data for purposes that are reasonable and proportionate in order to provide a service or a product. You can use it for certain other specified purposes like security, like customer service. But you can't sell sensitive information like health information, like sexual preference, other things that we treat very, very carefully without somebody's consent. That would limit the data brokerage, that would protect location information. That's so important to reproductive freedom. And all of that information is sensitive. Right now, in the system that we have, it gets spread around. There are apps, data brokers that collect that information. Put your phone number together with strings of location data and other information about you. Cambridge Analytica said it had about 5,000 data points on 200 million Americans. We need to shrink that down. And the ADPPA is the first bill that would really have an impact on those data practices.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about California. And I think this is where our differences may lie here.
Mhm.
So California is a state, right? One of many states. They're very progressive, though, in privacy and have been for a long time. So I think, my thoughts. Well, we know that Nancy Pelosi, she's the Speaker of the House. We know that the California delegation is very against the ADPPA because they don't want a lot of changes happening in what they're doing. And California, for me, is not just any state. So, it's the most, as you know, it's the most populous state in the U.S. 13 of every 100 people in the U.S. is a Californian. They have had privacy as a fundamental human right in their constitution for over 50 years. A lot of the stuff that we take for granted, like privacy policies in general, that those things were they were the pioneer in that. So I can see how California has done this work and they're very protective of what they're doing. And I understand why they oppose this bill. So I don't think it's that they don't feel that the US needs a federal privacy law. They just don't want that. They want to make sure that a federal privacy law is a floor, not a ceiling. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, well, two things. First, I think that the ADPPA is a much stronger bill than California's CCPA. And that's first and foremost for the reasons that I just described. That California is still rooted in that notice and choice model. The fundamental thing that CCPA is about is the ability to opt out of targeted advertising and out of having your data sold. But what data is collected and how it is shared subject to that opt out is defined by the privacy policy. So you still got the companies making the rules. So that's the first thing, but the most fundamental thing when it comes to protecting people's privacy. So I think it is worth, in order to have that kind of protection, worth and having that protection for everybody in the United States and having stronger protection for people in California than they have today. To have a national law that sets a single national standard and preempts. We are dealing here with the internet. That is, if anything was ever interstate commerce, in our commercial world, it is that. And Congress regulates that. And people ought to be able to have a single standard, a single set of expectations, regardless of where they are or where they travel to. So I think there are a lot of advantage to consumers in having that kind of single standard. Other ways that the ADPPA is stronger in California, it has protections, extend civil rights protections to the use of personal information in ways that discriminate on the basis of race, sex, and other protected categories. That is new ground in privacy. It includes protections relating to the use of algorithms and having companies, large companies, do algorithmic impact assessments, having every company do some kind of assessment. It also covers sectors that are not covered by the California law, including extending at least baseline privacy protections to small businesses. California carves out small businesses altogether. carves out sectors like healthcare. There are a lot of stronger protections, and it's an advantage to have those protections for people in California and for everybody, every man, woman, and child across the United States.
Very passionate about this. Interesting thing. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is against the ADPPA. Their reasoning, though, is very unique. And I agree with it a little bit. Okay. So one of their reasonings behind them being against it is because it doesn't preempt laws like the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act, which we know is a general applicability type of law. So what are your thoughts about when people say things like that in terms of preemption?
Look, I think there's some sensitive line drawing being done here. We, with colleagues at the Brookings Institution a couple of years ago, we outlined a sort of grand bargain around both preemption of state laws and private rights of action. That's, I think, very much been kind of the model that people have followed in the ADPPA and other bills. Part of that involves in preemption, kind of not doing a sort of black or white, either or approach, where you either leave all state laws in place or you preempt all state privacy laws. And that's kind of where the debate started out. So the Chamber of Commerce and businesses were saying, no, you just got to preempt the field. Well, that would wipe out 100 years of state privacy laws and some of the things that you were talking about in California and other places. So instead, you take a jigsaw and you leave a number of laws in place. I think, look, if I were making the decision, I probably would include the Illinois Biometric Privacy Prevention Act in what is preempted. But our proposal also allowed for states and municipalities to deal with biometric things like surveillance cameras in public places. So you're regulating the streets and other things. We do need to leave some of that play for state laws. Part of that trade-off too was allowing people to bring private lawsuits, but really making sure that having some filters that make sure that those states have those. Part of that involved allowing private litigation, but having some filters that ensure that those cases have merit, that you don't get kind of nuisance cases coming in that end up benefiting class action lawyers without really benefiting the public and at the expense of businesses.
What's happening right now in the world with technology that's concerning you the most around privacy?
Around privacy, I think it is. I think, Debbie, what I think concerns me the most is what's called ad tech. The platforms that support online privacy. I believe that there is value in advertising, and I've been a political activist and engaged in campaigns. I appreciate the importance of being able to reach your audience, and I think that's that is true in the commercial sector as well. So, being able to promote products, services is important to the economy. But what we are seeing is incredibly intrusive. And the problem is that, you have, the way that online advertising works is, there are these systems of what's called real-time bidding. We're literally, in a matter of microseconds, if you are online on a site, that can be the subject the target of ads that are sold in microseconds based on whatever their characteristics they're able to identify about you. And a lot of that is supposedly not identified to specific people. There are ways of tracking that don't do that, but a lot of that information is so leaky. So some information gets exchanged in those microsecond transactions of selling the ad, and then people are able to collect that, and then they're able to aggregate that information with other databases, and then all of a sudden, whatever that search was, whatever that product ad may have clicked on, ends up with data brokers and correlated with a lot of other information about you, and that becomes connected, and essentially, and that's part of how our data is just getting spread out in the wild. And the reason that we need those limits on collection, use, and sharing. But it's, advertising is incredibly complicated. I mean, I've spent a lot of time talking to people in ad tech, getting briefed on developments in ad tech systems, and I find it bewildering. So, it's an area where I think to realize the benefits of advertising, but to protect people's privacy, protect that data from being used in ways that are against your interests, against our interests as individuals. We need a better system. So I actually think that this is a place where the ADPPA could do better, by having the Federal Trade Commission do rulemaking in this area to help define the boundaries. So, what's good targeting, what's bad targeting. So, you don't want the stuff that's going to reveal somebody's sexual identity in most circumstances. But sometimes that may be right. Or if if you are trying to sell cosmetics for dark skin, you do want to be able to reach people of color, and that's probably a benign use. So we need to have the right balance here, and I think an agency that can delve into ad tech and explore these norms with some boundaries established by Congress is the right way to go.
What are your thoughts on kind of human versus consumer privacy? So a lot of the things that we're talking about in the US, a lot of it is around consumer privacy, not really human privacy. So do you think that we can bridge that gap, especially like, the FTC currently, even though they have a lot of power within the US, they don't regulate all industries and things like that. So I think what people want is more human rights, definitely consumer rights, right? But also more human rights. So do you think we'll ever be able to bridge that gap in the US?
Um, I think we're getting there, Debbie. Look, I agree with you. I think privacy is a fundamental human right. It touches on things that are basic to us as individuals, to our identities, our autonomy, our relationships, and privacy is something that enables all of that, enables us to formulate our thoughts about, politics, love, whatever. And that's what we should be protecting. When I talked about some of the work we did at the Brookings Institution on sort of privacy legislation and the way forward, we actually took some of the proposals and pieced them together and cut and paste and adjusted things and into a model bill, and called it the Information Privacy Act, for exactly a lot of the reasons that you are talking about, and talked about individuals, not consumers. The ADPPA actually does some of that in the sense it talks about individuals. It extends the coverage of some sectors that have been excluded. Some of this is unavoidable because of the way our system works. I mean, Congress regulates interstate commerce, and that's what the Federal Trade Commission is there for. So you can't avoid the consumer context entirely, and certainly much of the data collection that goes on occurs in that context. But we still have to keep an eye out on what the objectives are here.
Yeah. So if it were the world according to Cameron and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for privacy anywhere in the world, whether it be law, technology, human stuff? What are your thoughts?
Look, my number one wish is, to finish that business that I started on when I joined the Obama administration in 2009, which is to have comprehensive, strong privacy legislation, comprehensive legislation in the United States. And I think, that would have an impact on the world. I mean, right as it is today, there are 151 countries that I think it is that have comprehensive privacy protection laws, including China. It's mostly about protection from companies, not from the government, which can collect anything and everything that it wants, and certainly does that. But the United States has become the outlier. We should be leading in this area. We have a long history of privacy protection. I mean, I think in a real sense, privacy as a legal concept was invented in the United States. We have Bill of Rights, which protects papers and effects and your thought, your religion, your expression, so. And we've protected that, from the beginning of our country, and the right to privacy as a legal concept was originated by Louis Brandeis, and let's probably the most famous law review article ever in 1890. And there's a lot of law that's built up around that. The Europeans like to claim credit for the first comprehensive data protection law in the state of Hessen in Germany in 1970. Well, in 1970, we adopted the Fair Credit Reporting Act, just the first national law. And many of the fair information practices that are a foundation of privacy today, and including foundation for European privacy law, come out of work that was done in the U.S. government in the 1970s. So, when I say it was, privacy was made in the USA, there is a background there, but we've kind of abdicated our leadership over the past 30 years. So, if we can step up, I think we regain some moral credibility that can help on many fronts. And I think what happens, with data flows and surveillance coming out of the U.S.-EU agreement, I think advances international norms on government transparency and limits on surveillance and rights of people who are subject to surveillance. And there's an increasing amount of discussion about that around the world. There's discussion underway about how to deal with artificial intelligence and how do we should we regulate that. I think it is hard for the United States to engage in all of those discussions without having comprehensive protections in the commercial sector. So our credibility is at stake. I think, if we could get that done, we can help to advance discussion around the world on privacy.
I agree with that. A resounding agreement from me on
we
that.
Are in violent agreement again, just like we were in violent agreement in Berkeley. We are today.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think this will be very instructive for the audience, and I'm thrilled, and it's such an honor to have you on the show. I'd love for us to be able to find ways we can collaborate together in the future.
That would be great.
Well, thank you so much, Cameron. I really appreciate it.
All right. Good to see you.
All right. Good to see you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.